This story is so disturbing that even I hesitated to tell it. The rain had stopped an hour ago, but Highway 132 outside Montlouis still shimmered wet under the overcast sky as Daniel Mercer, 37, single, and newly unemployed, drove west in his aging Ford Escape with the heater blasting and a thermos of lukewarm coffee between his legs. He was halfway through a solo trip to Gaspé, hoping the coastal silence would clear his head after walking away from a decade-long marketing job in Ottawa and a breakup that had left more silence in his condo than even solitude could fill. The radio crackled suddenly, cycling through stations without his touch, landing briefly on a weather report from 1997 before dissolving into static that made Daniel jerk his hand back from the dial, as though it had shocked him. Around a bend near the cliffs overlooking the Gulf of St. Lawrence, he spotted a lone figure standing stiffly beside a moose crossing sign. Thumb out, no backpack, just a dark green parka, zipped high, and a black knit cap pulled low over the face. Without thinking too hard, Daniel slowed and rolled the passenger window down. "You headed west?" he asked, and the hitchhiker nodded once, silently, stepping into the car without a word. The interior filled with a damp, earthy smell, like wet moss and pine, but Daniel chalked it up to the soaked clothes. "I'm Daniel," he offered, easing back onto the road. The hitchhiker turned slightly, voice soft, gender ambiguous. "Call me Avery." The name rang a distant bell, but Daniel couldn't place it. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees, despite the blasting heater, and Daniel noticed his breath fogging slightly when he exhaled. They drove mostly in silence, broken occasionally by Daniel's small talk, about the coast, about the seafood in Rimouski, about nothing in particular, while Avery gave short, polite replies, never initiating conversation. Daniel noticed Avery never removed the gloves, even though the heater now made the car borderline uncomfortable. "You from around here?" he asked. Avery gave a half smile. "Not anymore." The words hung in the air like frost as they passed a roadside memorial. A small wooden cross Daniel hadn't noticed on his way east, decorated with faded plastic flowers and a laminated photograph fluttering in the wind. Daniel glimpsed the date on the cross, June 16th, 1997. For a split second, he thought he saw Avery's reflection in the window, turn to look at the memorial. But when he glanced sideways, his passenger was facing forward, expression unchanged. The truck stop coffee turned bitter in Daniel's mouth as they passed through Manche de Paix, a tiny fishing village where a few locals milled around the community center. Avery tensed visibly as they drove past, knuckles whitening inside those never-removed gloves. "Bad memories?" Daniel ventured. "You could say that," Avery replied, voice distant. "Sometimes places remember you even when you want to forget them." Route 132 narrowed as they continued west, hugging the coastline where the St. Lawrence widened toward the Atlantic. The overcast sky had darkened prematurely, and Daniel flicked on his headlights, noticing how they reflected oddly in Avery's eyes. Not the expected red-orange, but a pale, washed-out blue. 20 minutes later, just past the turnoff to Grande Vallée, Avery pointed to a gravel path barely visible through the trees. "You can drop me there." Daniel hesitated. There were no houses, no signs of life, just thick pine forest and the faint outline of a dirt road. "You sure?" he asked, but Avery was already opening the door. "Thanks for the ride," they said, stepping out. The door shut softly, and Daniel watched in the rear view as Avery disappeared into the woods without looking back. The car's digital clock flickered from 4:35 to 6:17 and back again in an instant. It wasn't until an hour later, parked at a gas station in Saint-Anne-des-Monts, that Daniel noticed the object on the passenger seat. a small leather-bound notebook, the kind people use to keep addresses or journal entries, with initials embossed faintly on the front. A.H. He flipped it open, curious, and found several pages of dated entries, none recent, all written in tight, neat handwriting, chronicling events that stopped abruptly in 1997. One entry, dated June 14th, read, "He said he'd take me to the cliffs. I don't think I'll come back." The next was blank. A sudden chill crawled up Daniel's spine. The last name on the inside cover, Avery Holmes, finally triggered the memory. A missing persons poster he'd seen tacked to the wall of a small diner earlier that day, faded by years of sun. The photo a little younger, but the same face under that knit cap. Avery Holmes vanished without a trace in June 1997, near Grande Vallée. Daniel flipped further through the journal, finding entries that detailed a relationship with someone identified only as T. Someone controlling, someone jealous, someone with a boat and family connections in Manche de Paix. The gas station attendant, a man in his 60s with weathered hands and a fisherman's cap, noticed Daniel's troubled expression. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said in a thick Quebecois accent, leaning against the counter. Daniel hesitated, then slid the journal across the counter. "Ever heard of an Avery Holmes?" The man's face changed instantly, eyes widening as he took a step back. "Where'd you get this?" he demanded, not touching the notebook. Daniel explained about the hitchhiker, the drop-off point, the mysterious circumstances. The attendant, Marcel according to his name tag, crossed himself quickly. "That stretch of road," he said, shaking his head. "Bad things happened there. That poor soul went missing after a fight with their boyfriend at the Anchor Bar in Manche de Paix. Boyfriend was a local boy, Thomas Beaumont, fisherman's son. Police questioned him, but nothing came of it. Body never found." Marcel's gaze drifted toward the window, toward the darkening coastline. "Every few years, someone comes in here with a story like yours. Always the same description, always the same spot." His eyes met Daniel's. "Nobody ever finds anything when they go back looking." Daniel felt his skin prickle as Marcel continued. "Last person who claimed to pick up your hitchhiker drove off those cliffs 2 days later. Car never recovered." Outside, the lights of the gas station flickered briefly, and Marcel glanced up nervously. "Take my advice," he said, sliding the journal back. "Leave it with the police in Gaspé and keep driving. Don't go back there." But Daniel couldn't shake the feeling as he checked into a motel in Saint-Anne-des-Monts that night, the journal on the nightstand beside him. He flipped through it again, finding newer entries he'd missed before. Entries dated years after Avery's disappearance, describing other drivers, other rides. The handwriting remained the same, but the tone had changed, becoming colder, more detached. Watching the dresser mirror from his bed, Daniel could have sworn he saw a figure in a dark green parka standing behind him, but when he spun around, the room was empty. He'd barely slept when dawn broke. His dreams filled with cliffs and cold water and a voice whispering, "He said he'd take me there." The police station in Gaspé was a modern building on Monte Wacom, where Officer Tremblay listened to Daniel's story with professional skepticism. "This case is nearly 30 years cold," the officer said, not quite meeting his eyes. "You're sure you picked someone up?" Daniel swore by it, described the parka, the voice, the notebook, the odd tension. But without a license plate, a photo, or any video, it was just a strange story on a long road. Still, Tremblay made copies of the journal entries and took Daniel's contact information. "We get stories like this every few years," she admitted reluctantly. "Usually from tourists, usually in spring or fall. There's never any evidence." She hesitated, then added, "The Beaumont family still lives in Manche de Paix. Thomas took over his father's fishing business. Respected community member now." Her tone suggested she had her own suspicions. The coastal road looked different in daylight as Daniel drove back toward the turnoff near Grande Vallée, the Gulf of St. Lawrence sparkling blue under a clearing sky. He found the gravel path where he'd dropped off Avery now hardly visible among spring growth. With the journal in his pocket, Daniel followed the overgrown trail into the woods, noticing how the temperature seemed to drop with each step away from the highway. The path wound through dense pine forest before opening suddenly onto a clearing overlooking the cliffs, a dizzying drop to jagged rocks and churning water below. Rusted chains and concrete anchors suggested there had once been a safety barrier here, long since removed or collapsed. In the soil near the edge, a weathered wooden cross leaned at an angle. No name, just the same date Daniel had seen on the roadside memorial, June 16th, 1997. As he approached the cross, the journal in his pocket grew inexplicably cold, seeping chill through his jacket. The wind off the Gulf carried whispered sounds almost like words, and Daniel spun around, certain someone was behind him. But he was alone in the clearing. On his knees beside the cross, Daniel noticed something half buried in the soil. A corroded metal button from a parka, dark green thread still attached. He pocketed it without thinking, his fingers numbing at the touch. The drive to Manche de Paix took 20 minutes, the village even smaller and more isolated than he'd remembered. Beaumont Fishing occupied a weathered building near the small harbor, and Thomas Beaumont himself was easy to spot. Tall, broad-shouldered, now in his 50s but still physically imposing, directing workers unloading crates from a boat bearing the name Avery's Wake. When Daniel approached, notebook in hand, Beaumont's expression shifted imperceptibly. "We're not hiring," he said before Daniel could speak. "I'm not looking for work," Daniel replied, holding up the journal. "I'm looking for information about Avery Holmes." The harbor seemed to fall silent, workers pausing to watch as Beaumont's face hardened. "That case was closed decades ago," he said flatly. "I don't know where you got that, but I suggest you take it to the police." When Daniel mentioned picking up a hitchhiker matching Avery's description, Beaumont's composure slipped momentarily, fear flashing across his features before settling into cold anger. "Get off my property," he growled, turning away. People who spread ghost stories around here find themselves unwelcome very quickly. Back in his car, Daniel noticed a worker from the docks had followed him. He named the boat that after it happened, the man said quietly through the window, glancing back nervously at the harbor. "Like some kind of sick joke, the whole town knows what happened, but nobody talks about it. Thomas took Avery to those cliffs after they fought at the anchor that night. Only Thomas came back." The man slipped a folded paper into Daniel's hand. Avery's mother died still looking for answers. This was her number before she passed. Her daughter, Avery's sister, still lives in Rimouski. Before Daniel could thank him, the man was gone, hurrying back toward the docks. The phone number connected Daniel with Catherine Holmes, Avery's younger sister, now in her 40s, who agreed to meet him that evening at a cafe in Rimouski. She arrived carrying a cardboard box of faded photographs and newspaper clippings, her resemblance to the hitchhiker unmistakable. "People have been seeing Avery on that highway for 28 years, she said after Daniel recounted his experience. "Police dismissed the sightings as urban legends, but my mother believed until the day she died that Avery was trying to tell us something." She laid out newspaper clippings about the disappearance, about the search that found nothing, about Thomas Beaumont's alibi provided by his father, a man with connections throughout the region. Avery and Thomas had been dating for months. It was toxic. Thomas was controlling, jealous, possessive. That night at the anchor, witnesses saw them arguing. Thomas dragged Avery outside. Nobody did anything. They were afraid of the Beaumont family. Catherine's hands trembled as she showed Daniel a photograph of Avery, smiling, alive, wearing the same dark green parka. The police searched, but not hard enough. Thomas's father made sure of that. Later that night, Daniel sat in his motel room with the journal open beside him, the button from the cliff gleaming dully under the lamplight. The room had grown unnaturally cold, despite the heater running at full blast. In the bathroom mirror, Daniel caught a glimpse of a figure standing in the shower behind him. Just for an instant, dark water streaming from the green parka, face obscured, but posture unmistakable. When he whirled around, the shower was empty and dry, His phone rang. Catherine, her voice urgent. I found something in my mother's papers. Thomas Beaumont's boat was named Prevailing Wind back then. It was out the night Avery disappeared. His father reported it had engine trouble and drifted near Grande Vallée, but a harbor master in Cloridorme noted it returning to Manche de Paix at 3 a.m. with 2 people aboard. Daniel returned to the gravel path at dusk the next day, heart pounding, headlights sweeping through trees, calling the name into the woods, but there was no response. No footprints, no sign of life, not even the wet indent where someone had stood. At the cliff's edge, Daniel placed the journal on the ground beside the cross, the metal button resting on its cover. The wind picked up suddenly, pages fluttering open to an empty page at the end of the entries. Daniel didn't know what he expected. Closure, perhaps, or some sign that Avery's spirit could rest. What he didn't expect was the sound of footsteps on the path behind him. Heavy and deliberate, Thomas Beaumont emerged from the trees, expression grim in the fading light. "You should have listened," he said flatly. "Some stories aren't meant to be dug up." Daniel backed away, suddenly aware of how close he stood to the cliff edge, how isolated they were. "Everyone started asking questions again after you showed up with that journal," Thomas continued, advancing slowly. "Station took my statement this morning, started talking about reopening the case, dragging my family through the mud again." He glanced at the journal on the ground, his face twisting. "Avery was going to leave me. I just wanted to talk, to explain things. It was an accident." Daniel's back foot met empty air, stones crumbling into the abyss behind him. "Nobody's going to believe your ghost story," Thomas said. "Now just feet away. You'll be another tragic accident on these dangerous cliffs. People will forget in a few months." The journal at their feet suddenly flipped open in the wind, pages turning rapidly as the temperature plunged further. Behind Thomas, at the edge of the clearing, Daniel saw it, a figure in a dark green parka, motionless among the trees, water pooling at its feet despite the dry ground. Thomas must have sensed something. He turned, following Daniel's gaze, his face draining of color. "That's impossible," he whispered, stumbling backward. I made sure he never finished the sentence as his foot caught on the exposed root of a pine, sending him sprawling dangerously close to the edge. Daniel lunged forward instinctively, grabbing for Thomas's arm, but his fingers closed on empty air as the older man tumbled backward over the cliff edge, his scream fading quickly. In the sudden silence, Daniel looked toward the trees, but the figure was gone. Only a wet patch remained on the needle-covered ground. The police investigation concluded Thomas Beaumont had fallen accidentally while confronting Daniel about spreading rumors that were damaging his business. The subsequent search of the Beaumont property revealed Avery's driver's license and a torn piece of the same green parka buried beneath the shed. Divers eventually located human remains near the base of the cliffs, along with fragments of Beaumont's original boat, apparently scuttled and replaced after 1997. DNA testing confirmed what Catherine Holmes had suspected for decades. Avery had indeed been taken to the cliffs and never left. Weeks later, back in Ottawa, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling, especially after receiving an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a Polaroid, Daniel at the wheel, taken from the passenger seat, Avery's gloves clearly visible, holding the camera. Scrawled on the bottom in that same tight handwriting, "Thanks for keeping the road warm." But there was something else too. A second photograph behind the first. This one sun-faded and water-damaged. Avery Holmes alive, smiling beside a boat, dark green parka unzipped in the sunshine, finally at peace. Hit subscribe and don't dare miss what's coming next, or the next scream you hear might be your own.